Today, you're standing on a land called India, a land that has witnessed thousands of years of history, countless empires, wars, civilizations, and cultures. But what if I told you that there was a time when not only India didn't exist, even the Earth wasn't there, the sun wasn't there, the moon wasn't there. In fact, even time, the way we measure it with a clock today, didn't exist. So then, where did everything begin? How did the universe come into existence from an invisible beginning? And how did that journey of billions of years eventually create the Himalayas, the Ganges, and our Indian subcontinent? Today, we're not just going to hear the history of India. We're going all the way back to the very first moment of existence, where the story of everything began.
You might be wondering, if there was nothing back then how did the Big Bang happen? The truth is, science still doesn't have a complete answer to that question. But whatever scientists do know, that's exactly what we're going to explore with evidence. So make sure you watch till the end, because this is where the most unbelievable journey begins, not of the Earth, but of our very existence.
When we talk about history, we usually hear stories about kings, wars, civilizations, and empires. But today, we're standing at the edge of a history where there are no kings, no countries, and not even the word history exists. Imagine you're traveling back through the flow of time. 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000, 10 million, then billions and billions of years, until you finally reach a point where there is no Earth, no sun, no galaxy, and not even light. All around you is a reality that even modern science still can't fully explain. But one thing scientists do know for sure. Around 13.8 billion years ago, the journey of the universe as we know it began with an extraordinary cosmic beginning. And at the very end of that journey, one day, India would be born.
Here's one thing that's really important to keep in mind. Right now, we're talking about a time that science can actually observe. But what existed before that is still a subject of research. So in this series, I'm not going to tell any fictional stories. Wherever science is certain, I'll only share confirmed facts. And wherever there are still questions, I'll leave them as questions.
Less than a single second has passed since the universe began its journey. But within this tiny fraction of time, events took place without which we, our Earth, and even India would never have existed. The temperature was so unimaginably high that even the cores of the hottest stars today would seem cold in comparison. At that point, there was no clear difference between matter and energy. Everywhere, there was nothing but an incredible flow of energy. Then, little by little, the universe started to cool down. The very first fundamental particles were born: quarks, electrons, and neutrinos. Billions upon billions of tiny particles were racing around at speeds close to the speed of light, colliding with each other, then breaking apart again. And in the middle of all that chaos, an orderly future was taking shape. Because one day, these particles would come together to form atoms. Atoms would form stars. Stars would form planets. And after that long journey, our Earth would be born, and much later, the Indian subcontinent.
Just think about it. Every atom in our body, every rock on this Earth, and even every stone of the Himalayas traces its history back to the birth of these tiny particles. So right now, we're not just listening to the story of the universe, we're listening to the story of the beginning of our own existence.
A few minutes have passed since the birth of the universe. The temperature has dropped a little, but it's still at a level where atoms can't remain stable. Everywhere, there's nothing but hot plasma and particles racing through space. But slowly, something incredible begins to happen. Quarks come together to form protons and neutrons. Then those protons and neutrons combine with each other to create the foundation of the first stable atoms, the nuclei of hydrogen and helium. But at this point, something major changes. Earlier, light could travel freely. Now, that light starts getting trapped. The universe gradually becomes covered in deep darkness. This period is known as the Dark Age of the universe. There are no stars, no light, just endless darkness and an expanding universe. But one day, this very darkness will give birth to the first stars, and inside those stars, the building blocks of the Earth, the Sun, and eventually our India will be created. Hearing about this Dark Age, it might seem like nothing is happening. But the truth is, all the light of the future was hidden inside this darkness. Because one day, this very darkness would give birth to the first stars. And from those stars, the story of our Earth would finally begin. The universe was still covered in deep darkness. For hundreds of millions of years, nothing but hydrogen and helium gas drifted through the emptiness of space. But slowly, an invisible force began to pull everything together. Gravity started gathering those clouds of gas. After millions of years, enormous, dense clouds formed, and from within those clouds, the very first stars were born. When the core of those stars became hot enough for nuclear fusion to begin, light appeared in the universe for the very first time. Brightness spread across the cosmos, as if the universe had finally opened its eyes after a long sleep. That light didn't just illuminate the universe, it also created the elements that would shape the future. Inside those stars, carbon, oxygen, and iron were formed, the very elements that would one day become the Earth, mountains, oceans, and the human body. And billions of years later, those same cosmic elements would also become the soil of the Indian subcontinent. What we know today as light truly came to life inside these very first stars. Over billions of years, that same light spread across the universe and eventually led to the creation of our Earth. So this moment isn't just the history of the universe, it's the beginning of our own existence. The first stars lived enormous lives, but they weren't eternal. After burning for millions and billions of years, they eventually began to run out of fuel. And then something unbelievable happened. Crushed under their own mass and gravity, those stars collapsed and unleashed a terrifying explosion known as a supernova. But this explosion wasn't just destruction, it was one of the most powerful moments of creation. Because during this explosion, all the heavy elements like iron, gold, and uranium were scattered across the universe. Before that, these elements had never existed freely in space. Those clouds of dust and gas slowly started coming together once again. Billions of years later, new stars, new planets, and a small blue Earth were born from that very cosmic dust. And one day, on that Earth, mountains, rivers, and life would emerge, and eventually the Indian subcontinent would be born. Which means, in the end, all of us are truly made from stardust. Everything we call our own, the soil beneath us, the water, and the air, was once created inside a star. So we're not just children of the Earth, we're children of the universe. After the supernova explosion, enormous clouds of dust and gas spread across space. Over billions of years, these clouds slowly began to spin and gather together under a powerful central pull. At the center, a new star was born, our sun. The remaining dust and gas around the sun formed a spinning disk, And from that disk, the planets gradually came into existence. In one small part of it, a hot, fiery Earth was born. At first, the Earth was nothing more than a giant ball of molten rock. There were no oceans, no atmosphere, only fire and constant collisions. But over billions of years, the Earth slowly began to cool down. Gases released from volcanoes formed the first atmosphere. Then, little by little, water vapor condensed and gave birth to the oceans. And this blue world of water would one day become the birthplace of life. From here, billions of years later, human civilization would emerge. And one part of that civilization would be India.
What we call Earth today wasn't a habitable planet in the beginning. It was nothing more than a blazing ball of molten rock. But over time, this world of destruction transformed into a planet where life could exist. And today, we are a part of that very life. Even tens of millions of years after the Earth's birth, it was still a chaotic and extremely hot planet. Volcanoes were erupting everywhere. Molten rock covered the surface, and countless asteroids kept crashing into it from space. Around that time, a young planet about the size of Mars, known to scientists as Theia, collided with the Earth at an incredible speed. The impact was so powerful that a massive amount of molten rock from the Earth's outer layer was blasted into space. Over the next thousands to hundreds of thousands of years, that debris was pulled together by gravity and formed Earth's only natural satellite, the Moon. The birth of the Moon didn't just add a beautiful object to the night sky. It stabilized the Earth's rotation, helped control future tides, and played a major role in creating an environment where life could eventually evolve billions of years later. And the future history of India was also invisibly connected to this extraordinary cosmic collision.
Many people think the moon is just a beautiful sight in the night sky. But if this collision had never happened, the Earth we know today might never have existed. The length of our days, the tides, and even the evolution of life could have been completely different.
Even after the Moon was born, the Earth was far from peaceful. The sky was covered with thick, dark clouds. Volcanoes continuously released water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and many other gases into the atmosphere. Slowly, the Earth's surface began to cool down. Eventually, that water vapor condensed and fell onto the Earth as the very first raindrops. But this wasn't rain that lasted for a day or even a month like it does today. According to scientists, it rained continuously for millions of years. Water slowly began to collect on the surface of the molten rock. Small bodies of water merged together and formed vast oceans. Those blue oceans didn't just transform the appearance of the Earth. They became the place where the first chemical foundations of life began to form. Billions of years later, the first living organisms would emerge from these waters. And after a long journey of evolution, humans, civilizations, and the history of the Indian subcontinent would eventually come into existence.
The oceans we see today once fell from the sky. That water didn't just create rivers and oceans, it also became the very first laboratory of life. And in the next chapter, we'll see how the very first life began inside those waters.
By this time, the Earth was already more than 4 billion years old. Deep beneath the vast oceans, where sunlight could never reach, hot, mineral-rich water was bubbling up. From hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, scorching water, metallic minerals, and all kinds of chemical substances were constantly flowing out. Over billions of years, these chemicals kept reacting with one another, forming more and more complex molecules.
Exactly how the very first life appeared is still something science hasn't fully figured out. But one of the strongest scientific ideas is that somewhere in these ancient oceans, the first molecule capable of making copies of itself came into existence. From that molecule, the Earth's very first single-celled life was born. It was so tiny that it couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Yet that invisible, microscopic life became the first ancestor of every tree, every animal, and every human on Earth. And through that long journey of evolution, billions of years later, the first humans of Indian civilization would eventually be born.
As unbelievable as it may sound, every living thing on Earth today traces its history back to a tiny life form that couldn't even be seen with the naked eye. From the largest elephant to human beings, all of us are distant descendants of that very first life.
The Earth's first living organisms were incredibly simple. They were single-celled, microscopic, and completely invisible to the naked eye. For billions of years, they lived quietly in the oceans, but among them, an extraordinary ability emerged. Some microorganisms learned how to use sunlight to make their own food. Today, we call this process photosynthesis. But this process had an unexpected consequence. While making food, these microorganisms started releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. At first, that oxygen reacted with iron in the oceans and disappeared, but over billions of years, the amount of oxygen increased so much that it began building up in the Earth's atmosphere. Scientists call this event the Great Oxygenation Event. It was one of the biggest turning points in Earth's history. Many ancient microorganisms couldn't survive this change and went extinct, but at the same time, it opened the door for more complex forms of life. The very first breath of every future forest, every animal, every human, and even every civilization of India was hidden in the work of these tiny microorganisms.
The oxygen we breathe so easily today didn't even exist on the early Earth. And it was created by tiny microorganisms that we can't even see with the naked eye. The greatest revolution in Earth's history began with its smallest forms of life.
As the Earth filled with oxygen, it was almost as if it was waiting for a whole new chapter to begin. Over billions of years, tiny single-celled organisms kept evolving until, one day, they learned to work together. The first multicellular life was born. This was one of nature's greatest experiments. Now, a single cell was no longer doing everything. Some cells produced energy, some controlled movement, and others sensed the outside world. Life was becoming more and more complex. Then, around 541 million years ago, one of the most extraordinary events in Earth's history took place, what scientists now call the Cambrian explosion. In a relatively short period of geological time, the oceans filled with countless new forms of life. The first eyes, the first hard shells, the first predators, and the first fast-swimming animals appeared. It was as if life had suddenly exploded into countless different forms. Most of those creatures are now extinct, but from among them began an evolutionary journey that would, billions of years later, lead to fish, reptiles, mammals, humans, and eventually the rise of Indian civilization.
If you could stand beneath the ocean at that time, it would feel as if life had suddenly burst into fireworks. For the first time, nature had created such an incredible diversity of life. And it was this very diversity that eventually led all the way to humans. For billions of years, life existed only in the oceans. The vast seas were the only living world on Earth. But evolution never stands still.
Little by little, some algae developed the ability to survive along the shallow shores of the sea. After millions of years of adaptation, the first land plants appeared. Their tiny green bodies slowly began covering the bare, rocky land. Then, the first forests began to grow. The amount of oxygen in the atmosphere kept increasing, and the Earth's climate started changing. Around the same time, some courageous fish began developing remarkable new features. Their strong fins slowly started turning into bony limbs, allowing them to survive outside the water for short periods. And one day, those brave creatures crossed the waves and stepped onto land for the very first time. It was one of the most important moments in Earth's history, because from those very first footprints, the long journey would eventually lead to reptiles, dinosaurs, mammals, humans, and finally, the history of Indian civilization.
Just imagine, the bravest moment on Earth's history might not have been a war. It might have been the very first time a fish crawled out of the water. That tiny step eventually paved the way for our own existence.
There was a time in Earth's history when humans didn't exist at all. Forests, rivers, and mountains were ruled by a group of giant creatures. Their name? The Dinosaurs. Around 230 million years ago, the Earth was part of one massive supercontinent called Pangaea. Over time, that enormous landmass slowly began to break apart. During that breakup, a huge tectonic plate was formed, the Indian Plate. Back then, India wasn't part of Asia like it is today. It was an isolated landmass in the southern hemisphere, slowly drifting northward. At that time, giant pterosaurs ruled the skies, enormous marine reptiles swam through the oceans, and countless dinosaurs roamed the land. Different species of dinosaurs also lived on the Indian Plate. For millions of years, they ruled the Earth as its most powerful creatures. But none of them knew that deep in the darkness of space, a massive rock was racing toward them. A rock that in just a few minutes would bring their empire to an end and open the door to the age of humans.
Here's something fascinating. Even during the age of the dinosaurs, India already existed. But it wasn't the India we know today. The entire Indian Plate was drifting across the ocean, moving steadily toward the north. In other words, India's journey had begun millions of years before humans ever existed. Around 66 million years ago, the Earth was still ruled by the dinosaurs. Giant titanauruses, terrifying predators, dense forests, and a world full of life. But the Earth had no idea that from the deep darkness of space, a massive asteroid about 10 kilometers wide was racing toward it. Traveling not at a few thousand, but well over 10,000 kilometers per hour, that cosmic rock slammed into what is now the Yucatan region of Mexico. At the moment of impact, it released energy equal to millions of nuclear bombs. Within seconds, a crater hundreds of kilometers wide was created. The Earth shook violently. Wildfire spread across thousands of kilometers. Massive tsunamis crashed into coastlines around the oceans. The sky filled with dust, ash, and molten rock. For months, and perhaps even years, sunlight could no longer reach the Earth's surface. The food chain collapsed. Around 75% of all species on Earth went extinct. The long reign of the dinosaurs came to an end. But hidden in every ending is the possibility of a new beginning. Because from the ruins of this catastrophe would rise the age of mammals, and millions of years later, the arrival of humans.
Just imagine, what if that asteroid had missed the Earth? Then maybe the dinosaurs would still be ruling the planet today, and a species called humans might never have existed. Sometimes the biggest changes in history come from an event that lasts only a few minutes.
After the dinosaurs went extinct, the Earth seemed to fall strangely silent. For millions of years, the forests, rivers, and mountains no longer echoed with the roars of those giant creatures. But nature never likes emptiness. The small mammals that had spent so long living in the shadows of the dinosaurs slowly began to emerge. They were fast, intelligent, and remarkably good at adapting to a changing world. Over millions of years, their bodies changed, their brains grew larger, and their behavior became more complex. Some began living in trees, some ran across open grasslands, while others built new lives in mountains and forests. It was along this long path of evolution that the earliest ancestors of the primates appeared. Their hands became more flexible, their forward-facing eyes gave them better depth perception, and their brains continued to develop. Millions of years later, one branch of these small creatures would evolve into a species that could control fire, create language, build civilizations, and one day write history on the Indian subcontinent.
One of the greatest lessons in history is this: not every strongest species survives. The ones that survive are the ones that can adapt to change. It was this very ability to adapt that eventually turned those tiny mammals into the most influential species on Earth: humans. Around 7 million years ago, a new chapter began across the vast grasslands and forests of Africa. They weren't modern humans yet, but they weren't ordinary apes either. Little by little, they learned to walk upright on two legs. That freed up their hands. Some carried food, some protected their young, and some began using tree branches as tools. Over millions of years of evolution came Australopithecus, followed by Homo habilis. For the first time, they broke stones and shaped them into sharp tools. Those simple pieces of stone became the very first technology in human history. Then came Homo erectus. Their brains grew larger, their bodies became stronger, and eventually they learned how to control fire. Fire didn't just push back the darkness. It provided safety, made cooking possible, protected them from the cold, and transformed human social life. India was still far away, but this small step in Africa would one day lead humans across thousands of kilometers, all the way to the Indian subcontinent. Today, we use smartphones and send satellites into space. But all of this technology began with a simple stone tool. And that very first invention changed the future of humanity forever.
Around 300,000 years ago, a new species was born in Africa: Homo sapiens. They were modern humans, just like us. Their brains were more advanced. They had a greater ability to learn language. They could plan ahead, work together in groups, and adapt to new environments much faster than any earlier human species. For thousands of years, they lived only in Africa. But around 70,000 years ago, changes in the Earth's climate, the search for food, and the attraction of new lands pushed them to begin an incredible journey. Small groups left the eastern coast of Africa, crossed the area around the Red Sea, and reached the Arabian Peninsula. From there, they continued moving east along the coastline. After a long journey through intense heat, storms, deserts, and countless unknown dangers, they finally reached the Indian subcontinent. They had no idea they were making history, But those very first human footprints became the opening chapter of India's human story. And the journey of an important part of the ancestors of today's billions of Indians began along this very route.
Today, we proudly call ourselves Indians, but our distant ancestors once walked thousands of kilometers to reach this land. The history of India didn't begin with a king or an empire. It began with the courageous journey of a group of travelers. After reaching the Indian subcontinent, modern humans found themselves in a completely new world. Some places were covered with dense forests, others with vast grasslands, while some had mighty rivers and towering mountains. There were no cities, no kings, no temples, and no forts. There was only nature and the daily struggle to survive. Living in small groups, people gathered fruits, caught fish, hunted wild animals, and took shelter near rivers or inside caves. They shaped stones into sharp tools, used fire to cook their food, and spent their nights sitting around the flames, sharing stories. Little by little, they learned to recognize the changing seasons, remember the paths of animals, understand the flow of rivers, and build a deep connection with nature. They had no idea that one day their descendants would create one of the world's oldest civilizations. But the very first chapter of India's history began with these ordinary hunter-gatherers. When we think about the history of India, we usually picture kings, wars, and mighty empires. But the truth is, the first chapter of India's history wasn't written on a throne. It was written through the lives of a small group of people sitting around a fire in the wilderness. For thousands of years, humans lived as wanderers. Today, they were here, tomorrow somewhere else. When the hunting ended, they had to search for a new place. When the fruits ran out, they had to begin the journey all over again. But around 12,000 years ago, the Earth's climate began to change. The last ice age came to an end. The weather became warmer and more stable. With this change, people noticed something extraordinary. New plants began growing from seeds that had fallen onto the ground. Slowly, they realized that if they planted those seeds themselves, they wouldn't have to depend on hunting all the time for food. In the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, in what is now the Baluchistan region of Pakistan, a settlement called Mehrgarh began to grow. It became one of the oldest farming communities in South Asia. For the first time, people cultivated wheat and barley. They started raising goats, sheep, and cattle. Homes were built from mud, places were made to store grain, and families began to grow. People were no longer just struggling to survive. Now they were learning to plan for the future. And this small village would one day become the foundation of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Just imagine, the greatest invention in history might not have been the wheel or even fire. It might have been a tiny seed, because it was that seed that taught humans how to build homes, create villages, and eventually build civilizations. After thousands of years of farming, animal domestication, and the growth of small villages, a new revolution began in the Indian subcontinent. Large settlements started rising along the rivers. People were no longer just farmers. Now they were craftsmen, traders, architects, and builders. As time passed, these settlements grew into great cities. Around 2600 BCE, one of the world's most advanced urban civilizations was born, the Indus civilization. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, Rakhigarhi, and many other cities were built using the same remarkable planning. Wide, straight streets, strong, baked brick houses, private wells in homes, advanced drainage systems, granaries, workshops, and well-organized city layouts, things that were truly extraordinary for that time. They traded by land and sea with distant Mesopotamia. Gold, silver. Many people think modern urban planning began only a few hundred years ago. But the truth is, around 4,500 years ago, the people of the Indus civilization had already built a drainage system that was one of the most advanced in the world at that time. The more you learn about history, the more it will amaze you. For more than 700 years, the Indus civilization remained one of the world's greatest urban civilizations. Thousands of people lived in carefully planned cities. Trade reached distant lands. A prosperous way of life flourished along the rivers. But then, little by little, something began to change. The rivers started changing their course. Some regions faced long droughts, others experienced unpredictable floods, and changes in the climate made life increasingly difficult. Eventually, the great cities slowly began to empty. People spread out into smaller villages and new regions. What's truly remarkable is that there is no clear evidence of a great war behind the fall of this civilization. There are no stories of massive royal palaces being destroyed. It was as if a great civilization simply faded away with the passage of time. But even though the civilization disappeared, its people did not. Their knowledge, farming practices, craftsmanship, culture, and way of life continued to live on through future generations. And it was during this period of change that a new chapter began in the Indian subcontinent, the beginning of the Vedic Age. From here, a new history of India's ancient religion, philosophy, culture, and literature would begin to unfold.
We still don't have the answers to every mystery in history. Even today, scientists are still researching the exact reason behind the decline of the Indus civilization. But one thing is certain. Even if a civilization comes to an end, the knowledge and culture of its people can live on through future generations.
Even after the great cities of the Indus civilization slowly fell silent, life in the Indian subcontinent did not come to a stop. New settlements continued to grow, especially as people moved from the northwest toward the fertile plains of the Ganges and Yamuna. Amid this transformation, a new chapter in India's history began, the Vedic Age. During this time, people's greatest treasure wasn't written books, it was memory. For generation after generation, mantras, hymns, and knowledge were passed down orally from teacher to student. It was through this oral tradition that the Rig Veda, one of the oldest texts of Indian tradition, came into being. In that society, the family was at the center of life. Cattle were a symbol of wealth, and yajnas played an important role in both social and religious life. Gradually, people moved farther east. Dense forests were cleared, new villages were established, agriculture expanded, and the use of iron made farming much easier. Small tribal groups grew into Janapadas, and over time, those Janapadas developed into powerful Mahajanapadas. It was during this period that the true foundation of India's political history began to take shape. Ahead lies an era that will witness the birth of Gautama Buddha, Mahavira, and rulers who would transform the history of the entire Indian subcontinent.
Today, we can open a book and read knowledge that's thousands of years old. But during the Vedic Age, the human mind was the greatest library. This tradition of preserving knowledge by passing it down from one generation to the next entirely by word of mouth remains one of the greatest wonders of human history.
Time moved on. Small villages turned into big settlements, and those settlements slowly grew into powerful kingdoms. By the 6th century BC, 16 powerful Mahajanapadas had emerged across northern India. Kashi, Kosala, Avanti, Vatsa, Vaji, and Magadha, everyone was busy trying to increase their power. There was constant competition over controlling river routes, fertile land, iron mines, and trade routes. But amidst all this competition, Magadha started pulling ahead of the others. Because of the fertile land at the confluence of the Ganges and Son rivers, plenty of natural resources, a strong army, and skilled rulers, Magadha quickly became an unstoppable force. King Bimbisara achieved success in both diplomacy and military strength. His successor, Ajatashatru, expanded the kingdom even further. Nobody realized back then that this very kingdom would one day give birth to an empire that for the first time would unite almost the entire Indian subcontinent under one flag. The history of India was about to take a new turn.
Every great empire in history started out as a small kingdom one day. Magadha was no exception, but the right leadership, resources, and strategy took it to such heights that it changed the history of India forever.
Magadha had by then become the most powerful kingdom in northern India. After the Shashunaga dynasty, the Nanda dynasty came to power. The most powerful ruler among them was Dhanananda. Stories of his massive army, immense wealth, and vast power spread far and wide. Just then, thousands of kilometers away in Macedonia, a young emperor was conquering one empire after another. His name was Alexander. After conquering Persia, his goal was to reach the edge of the world. In 326 BC, he entered the northwestern frontier of the Indian subcontinent. A historic battle took place on the banks of the Jhelum River against King Porus. Although Alexander won the battle, he was so impressed by Porus's courage and self-respect that he gave him back the responsibility of ruling his kingdom. But Alexander's soldiers didn't want to move any further. The even more powerful Nanda Empire was waiting ahead. The exhausted soldiers rebelled, forcing one of the world's greatest conquerors to turn back. It was during this unstable time that a brilliantly talented man silently appeared on the stage of history, Chanakya. Just one decision of his would soon change the history of India forever.
Sometimes the biggest changes in history aren't born on the battlefield, but in the mind of a thinker. Chanakya wasn't the commander of a huge army, but his plans gave birth to an empire that united India for the very first time.
The history of India was standing at a new turning point. Alexander's army had returned from the west, but the political instability left in his wake still kept the kingdoms of northwestern India weak. On the other hand, although the Nanda Empire in Magadha had immense wealth, discontent was growing among the common people. Right at this time, the paths of two extraordinary personalities of history met. One was the highly brilliant teacher and diplomat of Taxila, Chanakya. The other was a young, brave, and ambitious man, Chandragupta. Chanakya saw a potential in that youth that no one else had seen. He didn't just want to create a king, he wanted to build an empire where the divided power of small kingdoms would unite to give birth to a unified India. Through years of planning, training, diplomacy, and struggle, a new journey began. Very soon, a historic battle would start against the Nanda Empire, and as a result of that battle, India's first vast empire would be born, the Mauryan Empire. From here would begin a chapter that would remain immortal, not just in the history of India, but in the history of the entire world. Friends, so far we have seen how history has moved from the creation of the universe to the first civilization of India, the Vedic era, the Mahajanapadas, and the arrival of Chanakya. But the story of the real empire hasn't even started yet. In the next episode, the incredible story of Chandragupta Maurya, Chanakya, and India's first great empire will begin. If you enjoy experiencing history like a movie, then subscribe to the RaidenVox English channel right now. Coming up is the complete history of the Mauryan Empire, Emperor Ashoka, the Gupta Empire, the Mughal era, the Freedom Movement, and modern India, all in a massive cinematic documentary series. Join us on this amazing journey through history. See you in the next episode.